In 1956, a young lawyer bought a house in Pasadena for a price that would embarrass him decades later, not because it was too much, but because it was so little. He was not rich yet. Nobody around him thought he would become one of the wealthiest men in the country. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. He never moved. Not when his net worth crossed $1 million, not when it crossed $100 million, not when it crossed $1 billion. Charlie Munger lived in that same house until the day he died, decades after he could have bought entire city blocks without noticing the dent in his account. Somewhere along the way he made a rule, one he almost never broke. And once you understand what that rule actually was, you will start noticing how many people around you are breaking it right now without realizing it. The rule was not complicated, and that is exactly why almost nobody follows it. Munger decided early and permanently that his lifestyle would not rise with his net worth. Most people think that sentence describes cheapness. It does not. It describes something closer to discipline under pressure, because staying in that same house while your bank account multiplies 1,000 times over is not natural. It goes against nearly every social instinct a human being has. And understanding why he could do it while almost nobody else can is going to change how you think about every dollar that passes through your hands from here forward. Here is the trap almost everyone falls into, and you have probably felt it without naming it. The moment more money arrives, the mind immediately starts hunting for ways to spend it, not because you need to, because the brain treats a bigger number as permission. Researchers who study this call it lifestyle inflation, but the term makes it sound clinical, almost harmless. It is not harmless. It is one of the most reliable wealth killers that exists, quieter than a bad investment, slower than a market crash, and far more common than either. A stock market crash makes headlines. Lifestyle inflation makes nothing. It just makes you broke on paper 30 years later, one upgrade at a time. And by then it is too late to undo most of it. Munger understood something that almost never gets said out loud in personal finance content, something that sounds almost too simple to be the secret, and yet it is. The house did not need to get bigger. His needs had already been met years earlier. By the version of the house he already owned, everything past that point was not a need. It was a want dressed up as a milestone, and Munger refused to let a want disguise itself as something he was required to chase just because the money existed to chase it. Now stay with me, because this is the part that most people never get to, the part underneath the frugality that actually explains it. Munger was applying inversion here, one of his favorite mental tools, without ever needing to announce that he was doing it. Instead of asking, what should I buy now that I can afford more, he flipped the question entirely. He asked what happens to a person who lets spending expand every single time income does. And when you actually trace that question forward honestly, without flinching, the answer is uncomfortable. That person never actually gets ahead. Their income rises, their comfort rises with it, and their financial position relative to their own life barely moves year after year, no matter how much the paycheck grows. They are running on a treadmill built out of their own comfort, and the treadmill speeds up every time they get a raise. This is where the stealth part of stealth wealth actually starts to matter, because it is not primarily about hiding money from other people. It is about hiding money from yourself in the sense that you refuse to let your own eyes normalize a bigger number into a bigger appetite. Munger kept living inside limits that no longer applied to him financially on purpose, because he understood that removing the limit removes the discipline that built the wealth in the first place. The moment the ceiling disappears, most people do not become wiser with money. They simply spend up to wherever the new ceiling happens to be, and the cycle resets at a higher, more expensive level forever. Let me give you the version of this that is easiest to feel, because numbers alone rarely land the way a real comparison does. Picture two people, both earning the same six-figure income at the same age. One of them upgrades every time money allows it a nicer apartment, a newer car, a more expensive vacation each year, because it feels earned and it feels normal. The other person, following something close to Munger's rule, keeps their spending essentially frozen while their income climbs, and quietly redirects the difference into investments that compound year after year, without ceremony, without anyone noticing. 10 years later, on the surface, the first person looks more successful. Nicer things, nicer photos, a life that photographs well. The second person looks almost exactly the same as they did a decade earlier, but one of them has built real, compounding, permanent wealth, and the other has built a very convincing performance of it that could collapse the moment their income dips even slightly. Munger built his entire financial life to be the second person deliberately for decades, while an entire industry around him was doing everything possible to convince people that the first path was the reward for success. Here is the psychological trap hiding underneath all of this, the one that explains why so few people can actually follow this rule, even when they fully understand it. Visible spending gives you an immediate hit of social feedback. Someone notices the car, someone comments on the trip, someone treats you slightly differently because of what you are wearing or driving. That feedback feels like proof that the spending was worth it. But invisible compounding gives you nothing to show anyone, no reaction, no compliment, no visible proof for years, sometimes decades. Munger was comfortable operating entirely without that feedback loop, trusting the math even when nobody around him could see the results yet. That comfort with invisibility, with being underestimated, with looking far less impressive than his actual position, might be the single hardest part of his philosophy to copy, harder even than the investing itself. And this is exactly why the rule mattered so much to him for so long. Every dollar that did not go toward looking wealthy stayed available to actually become wealthy, compounding quietly in the background while his lifestyle stood still. The house in Pasadena was never really about the house. It was a permanent, physical reminder to himself of a decision he had made once and refused to keep relitigating every time his income changed. He did not need new discipline every year. He needed one decision made early, protected for decades. So here is the question worth sitting with once this ends, because it is the only part of this that actually matters for you. Somewhere in your life right now, your income has probably grown past the limit you set for yourself years ago, back when you had less. Has your spending grown along with it automatically, without a real decision behind it, simply because the money was there and the moment felt like it deserved a reward? Or have you made an actual, conscious choice about where that extra money goes? Munger's rule was never about denying yourself everything. It was about making sure the choice was actually yours, made on purpose, instead of a default your brain reached for the second your bank balance moved. That is the part of his wealth that never showed up in a stock price. And it is the part still available to anyone willing to make the same decision he made quite quietly and then simply refuse to break it. If this changed how you are thinking about your own spending right now, stick around, because the next part of his philosophy builds directly on this one. Subscribe if you want to keep working through the rest of it with me. He never needed the world to see his wealth. He only needed to know it was still there, growing, untouched, exactly where he left it.